All right. Good morning, everybody. Hi, my friend Betty. Hovey is with me today on Compliance Capers. My name is Sonal Patel with SP Collaborative, and my good friend is here with CHCS Consulting. Happy Friday.
Yes, same to you. Hey, y'all. Thanks for joining us.
That's right. We are here for our last discussion for the month of June on TPEs. We started the month off strong, talking about the lengthy background information that is involved in the Targeted Probe and Educate program. And then we spotlighted a couple of specific and current TPEs that are going on for psychotherapy. And we are talking today about something I know when I look in the mirror these days, there is that ring that is forming around both of my eyes for cataracts. So that is a ophthalmologic condition that we'll get into, but this particular Targeted Probe and Educate is going on for a specific surgical procedure. It's often called cataract extractions or cataract surgeries. Regardless, it is a procedure that removes when the cataract is full and ripe. There are all sorts of terms when you read the operative report in the language of the status of the cataract. But regardless, cataract extractions, cataract surgeries are in the spotlight here for this particular MAC region. So, we were looking at a variety of office visits from E&M to our psychotherapy. Now it's literally a surgical procedure. So like I stated in the very first episode for the background, they do all of the services now. Since 2017, they look at everybody, every provider, every type of supplier, any type of service line. So we really wanted to include something a bit different in our month of TPE discussion. Right, Betty, I thought this was a good one. It's also Cataract Awareness Month for the month of June. So I was like, well, why not throw this in there? Talk about it as well. Try and squeeze it in before the month ends. So, yeah.
That's good. I didn't realize it was Cataract Awareness Month, so it's very fitting that we end the month with talking about these cataract extractions.
Exactly right. So let me just go ahead and quickly pull up that link that you guys have seen in the past, because it is, again, in the Novitas region. And so they have kind of a summary list of the 9 or so active items that they are looking at. And like I had stated before, there is quite the litany of things that are now quote unquote inactive because they have been completed. So there that link is again, where you will see that cataract extractions is identified as a active and current review that they are going through. So I wanted to make sure that you guys have that available to you to pull up quickly. But in general, when you look at the documentation kind of checklist that this MAC region provides, which is really, really good in terms of, what the MAC wants to see in the documentation that's being sent over at their request, right? They already have those surgical claims on file with the MAC, right? But what is deficient or what they want to see and make sure that those billed claims are being supported is inside of that documentation. And so again, like in the weeks past, I will let you go over what that, checklist is of those hot ticket TPE things that they're actually wanting to take a look at in support of the extraction.
Sure. Well, This one is a lot shorter than some of the other ones that we were looking at for the past TPEs from this month. And once again, it does contain some of the same things like, the correct beneficiary, the date of service, your legible signature, that kind of junk. But the ones that are specific to cataract extractions, they have that the documentation includes procedure notes or the operative report of the cataract extraction performed for the date of service under review, which kind of leads me to believe that people were sending things in that did not include the actual op report, which is, if that's what they're looking at, you kind of need to send that. Documentation includes evidence that the patient has cataract. So once again, in your operative note, in your header, you should always be putting in the indications for the procedure. So if they're asking for that information, that's something that should be in every op report that's given. So make sure that you're including your indications there. Documentation includes evidence that the patient has impairment of visual function due to cataracts impacting their ability to carry out activities of daily living, so their ADLs. That's also something that's mentioned in the LCDs that they talk about, making sure that you're documenting those types of things. So it's a good idea if you're doing any kinds of procedures, take a look for in whatever region you're in for your MAC, and take a look and see if there's some LCDs about it or articles, LCAs, where they will give you the ICD-10 information and stuff like that to see what they're looking for as far as suppurative diagnoses for the procedures. Obviously, if you're doing cataract extraction, the patient needs to have a cataract or, I don't know what you're doing. Also, talks about then the generals again, that the patient gave informed consent for the procedure. Also, they want you to document any other preoperative ophthalmologic studies or workup that has been completed. And then, if applicable and required, submitted documentation should also include a beneficiary waiver of liability. So a lot more concise than what we saw on some of the other ones. But, generally, as I was saying on the last ones too, with the checklist, it also gives you a chance to make sure, these are the important things. If you want to do a quick check on your cataract surgeries in your office, what's been being done, you can use that little checklist to kind of go down and say, okay, these are the things that the MAC's looking for in these, let's make sure in general, not just in ones that, they're asking us for, or if your office isn't under a TPE, just say in general, are we including stuff, that the MAC is saying is important, to support the services we're doing.
Absolutely, Betty. Yeah, that's a great breakdown. And I hope the audience picked up on the fact that there were different items in this particular checklist, again, because this is a surgical procedure. So I think it's a really good thing for our surgical providers to remember that these types of, informed consent issues, papers, things that are stored away somewhere tucked in the EMR, that has to be identified and pulled out by that team of people, right, who we've advised in the past should be the ones who are printing those particular hidden away tabs, right, out, print them out, and then include that in your TPE educational material packet that you are providing, sending over back to that nurse reviewer who's going to then be taking a look at that supportive documentation. So again, make sure that you can check that informed consent, for example. That's also a really good reminder that our operative reports have to be written according to the standards, right, of what an auditor needs to identify, those indications for coverage. Absolutely. The patient has to have a cataract, right, that is ready to be taken out. The patient needs to have had a variety of ophthalmologic tests, like you had stated, again, to help support the background process, right, of how that cataract was forming months ago, when it's going to be ready for that surgical extraction. So yeah, while you were talking, I quickly pulled up the LCD that is applicable here for the Novitas region. There is also the coordinating LCA. Since years ago, they stripped. We're from the olden times, and they used to make this gigantic document with everything, with the LCD and the ICD-10, and the ICD-9 codes then combined into one huge document. But over the years, they got savvy and stripped it apart to an LCD document and an LCA document, which is nifty. I just could not put up the link here for the LCA. I'll provide it in the chat. Because that link is gigantic for that LCA. There's too many characters here on StreamYard, so they don't let you put that link in. But regardless, it is there. I will provide it. And that is a great place for where our practices can make sure for their CPT codes, their HCPCS codes, etc., to make sure that you have someone on the team cross-checking, right? Is there a applicable LCD for my service line, right? And there definitely are for these CPT codes that are identified for this particular cataract extraction surgery with our CPT code 66982 through 66984. So again, only those three CPT codes that are at play here, but there is a difference in the language of the definition that goes behind that particular CPT code, and then the insertion of that intraocular lens prosthesis, as well as with and without that endoscopic cyclophotocoagulation. That's a mouthful. And of course, it's about reimbursement as well. I just wanted to, I know we didn't touch on that on the previous episodes, but because this is a surgical issue, the cash is higher, the reimbursement is higher. So I happened to pull up a fee schedule for both of our regions of Novitas. Again, in Texas is separate. I just plucked Houston, for example, and then I just picked DC for the other side of Novitas. So that CPT code 66982 for the extracapsular cataract removal with insertion of intraocular lens prosthesis, complex, requiring devices or techniques not generally used in routine cataract surgery. That's the most important part of 66982. That is the one that is complex. And that fee schedule for Houston, Texas, just for example, pays around $752 versus the Novitas in Washington, D.C., for example, is around $830. So there's a big difference there, right? And the money is big. And so again, these are the greater factors of why the CMS, these MACs, are looking at these hot ticket items, right? Again, we stated this throughout compliance capers. These various programs are identified and established to help protect the Medicare Trust Fund, right? And the funds that are there. So I thought that was really, really important. I know the paperwork on these TPEs that we're providing here in the links don't actually state that, right? But I wanted to make it a point to the audience that the fee schedule is like that. It's big ticket money. So that is why they are looking at these particular things. And again, if it's a complex surgery, that supportive documentation, that operative report has to state those various tools that you were using to qualify that as a complex procedure. Right, Betty?
Yeah, I think CMS maybe wants to keep the focus on the documentation, not on the money. So,
Yeah.
I think that's why, maybe
don't.
they're making separation. So people aren't, oh, well, the money. Yeah. So it's like, no, it's about what you've documented and what it supports,
That's right.
that's something that they usually stray away from when they're looking at these, until you see like the OIG, of course, which is separate. They'll put out those things saying, well, y'all spent $29 million paying for these things, blah, 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 and they kind of point to the money. But when you're looking at the other things, when they're putting them out from CMS's side, usually it's, strictly toward what's documented and what's supported in that documentation.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So, there's also the variety of information on that LCD for those particular indications that you had talked about, right? So those covered indications in that LCD, it's L35091. And they literally talk about there are a variety of items that have to be met, right? When one or more of the following indications are present. So for Novitas, they're stating that visual function no longer meets the patient's needs based on visual acuity, visual impairment, and potential functional benefits. Or number two, that visual impairment and function are not correctable by glasses or other non-surgical measures. Or number three, the patient has undergone a pre-op exam that documents the following things. Again, that inability to function satisfactorily due to visual impairment while performing those various activities of daily living, those ADLs. Confirmation that the cataract is causing the visual impairment or other ocular or systemic conditions, and the cataract is causing unacceptable glare, polyopia, or reduced quality of vision. So they go on for about 8 items. There's a clinically significant anismometropia inside the presence of the cataract. So that's a specific ophthalmologic condition that they see inside of that cataract. They go on and talk about the lens opacity is interfering. So I think it's really important that our audience understand and follow these particular covered indications, especially if you happen to be a provider in this jurisdiction of Novitas. So definitely take that time and go through that LCD that is provided because it goes on for quite a few pages. And then, like I stated, that coordinating LCA, that article is going to identify what diagnoses, what are those ICD-10 codes that are going to be covered as well for these 3 CPT codes, these 3 surgical procedures that they've honed in on specifically. So, yeah.
Yeah, and just for a little background information on, because we've been talking about the cataract, assuming, and sometimes I do this when I'm talking about something, I'm assuming everybody understands what I'm talking about till I have somebody who's like, what does that mean? But with the cataracts, usually we see them in older patients, which is why it's such a hot Medicare item in the first place. But the proteins and the fibers in the lens of the eye start to break down, and it forms that clouding in the lens. And most people have seen, if not in a person, you've seen it maybe in your animals, because certain dogs, will have a tendency to get them. And it can be caused by aging or by injury, diabetes. A number of things can cause the cataracts to, keep going and going, and, it'll just keep clouding to where, the patient's vision is affected. So when they do the cataract extractions, they are the CPT codes that are looked at for the TPE include extracapsular and intracapsular cataract extraction. Now, I made a little slide that shows a picture of the eyeball, so people could get kind of a better idea. So if you look there, you see where we'll have the outside portion of the eye with the cornea and the iris and the pupil going in. And then in the middle there in white, you see the lens. And so when they're doing the cataract extractions, they're going into the lens. And sometimes with ultrasound, they will kind of like liquefy and bust it up and, pull the pieces out, or they suck it out. And I've said before, I'm pretty good with, I love watching surgeries and procedures and being present when they're being performed, except when they're with the eyeball. That's the one thing I remember when they changed these codes and I was teaching on them, and I actually had a little video of when they were putting the thing in the eye and so I'm showing it. And usually with videos, when I'm showing them, everybody else is a lot of people are getting grossed out and like, oh, because there's blood and all that. And I'm just like, oh, come on. But when they're doing the eye, I couldn't even watch it. So I'm like trying to show people. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to turn away while they're doing this because it just, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. So in this picture, you can see where the capsule is again. And I like this one because it's in red. So it really makes it stand out. So intracapsular versus extracapsular extractions, in both kinds of procedures, they're actually in the capsule. So extracapsular outside, it doesn't really, it's a misnomer. So it's about how much they're removing. So in both ones, they go inside the capsule. They remove out the lens. They'll either do the ultrasound or, they piece it out and take out the lens. And then with extracapsular, they leave part of the capsule in the back so that the IOL, the implant, adheres to the back of the capsule. So it holds it in place better. With intracapsular, they take the entire capsule out. And then the IOL, the implant, usually goes inside the iris instead. So it's kind of like where they're placing it, but it's just how much of the capsule they're removing. The intracapsulars aren't done as much these days because they requires a bigger incision. And so, the repercussions to the patient as they're recovering, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. So they like to stay away from those. The smaller incisions everybody likes better. So there's a lot more extracapsular than intracapsular extractions anymore. But I just wanted to give some good pictures so people could kind of visualize, pun intended, visualize, what we're talking about with cataracts. And before we move on, pull that back up.
Put that back up.
Yes, please. Before we move on, today is Soma's birthday. So I just wanted to kind of put that up there for everybody to see, and for Sonal to see. So happy birthday, my friend.
Thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, that was a great image. It was a great breakdown of what goes on in the eye. And I'm so glad that you circled back there on the end and talked about the fact that that intracapsular surgery is not really used, right? So, I am not privy to the details at the AMA, right? But that CPT code does exist for that 66983, and
yes.
Specifically says in the industry that technique for intracapsular extraction is not really used. It's rarely used today due to the development of more advanced technologies, like you were stating. So, it's really, really interesting that code is still in existence, right? But I guess in perhaps certain areas, it is performed, although it's going to be performed very rarely. So that's really, really good for the audience to keep in mind as well, that it's just then, for the most part, going to be those two other CPT codes that we talked about that were focused on the extracapsular. So yeah, really, really great information that you provided as usual. And then what about those charts in terms of where their process is? Are they in round 1, round 2, round 3? I thought this was a really interesting way to end our month as well, because from what I could understand when I looked through those 8 or so pages of those bar graphs, it looked like they were already doing multiple rounds on these various providers in various stages, rounds 1, 2, and 3. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I in looking at it, there is one of them, a lot of them were in round one, and like the first one that they showed in here, they had 92% minor in round one. And so they were done.
Oh,
They were
good.
like, okay, we're good,
Okay.
so that's a good thing.
Right.
But they have another one in here that actually they had 92% minor in round one and 4% moderate and 4 major. And the 4% major is probably what prompted them to say, okay, let's do another round. We'll go ahead and check again. And so in round 2, they had no minor, no major, but 100% moderate errors.
Oh, wow.
So something, again, just like when we looked at last time, something, I don't know, they didn't get something. Maybe they had a different provider come in, maybe, who knows? But so they went to the third round, and in the third round, there was no change. There was still 100% in the moderate of errors.
Okay.
So, at this point, we just see the graphs. We don't get really any information from it. So you and I were talking about this. We were just supposing, right?
Yeah.
So we don't know what happened after this, but my assumption, since there was 100% moderate errors in round 2, and they said we need to do another round because of that, there was still 100% error in moderate in round 3. So I'm assuming that it was, probably handed over to like the RAC or somebody else to say, they're not getting this for whatever reason. So maybe we now need to take away the carrot, which is all of our help that we're giving you. And now it's time for the stick,
That's right.
so,
That's right.
but we're not sure. But that was one that I found was interesting, because in all the other TPEs we looked at, none of them had been through a third round. So with the other ones, though, most of the other ones either had only one round completed or 2 rounds. So that was the only one that had the 3 rounds. So that was something I thought was interesting to kind of, like pull out. So yeah, a couple round 1s, but a lot of round 2s, and that big one that went after, I think, around 3 plus,
Right. Yeah. No, I love that analysis, again, based on our hypothesis, right? Because we are not privy to all of the facts and details about what the various, who the various providers are. So yeah, no, I thought that was a great breakdown of those bar graphs. In the document as well, they highlight those top denial and partial denial reasons. And of course, the majority were about medical necessity, insufficient documentation, billing errors, and then incorrect coding. So when you identify the medical necessity, it's of course lack of evidence to support the requirements in our LCD, right? Again, this is from the jurisdiction of Novitas. So make sure you're looking keenly at that LCD. It also stated that documentation did not support an eye examination that needs to be performed prior to the cataract surgery. And then it also stated that documentation did not support any activities of daily living were affected. So those ADLs that might have been affected weren't actually documented, or documentation that showed it wasn't sent in. So then that takes us to that insufficient documentation category, and they break that down to, again, tisk, 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 no documentation was sent in based on that ADM request, right? They just didn't do it. They just said, well, we missed that deadline. So shame, 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 right? That could have been easily submitted. They also said that insufficient documentation, this makes me sad, was for the incorrect eye, right? That's a simple thing that we have to make sure we're billing out for that correct eye. And then that documentation has to support it as well. I'm praying that the surgery was not performed on the incorrect eye. It's a clerical error on both ends, a clerical error on the documentation and on the claim. That's what I'm praying happened, right?
You know, my only thought, it might be with the ICD-10. Maybe the ICD-10 code was the right, but the procedure was done on the left. So they're looking at that going, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. So,
That's right.
watch those ICD-10s, watch your matchup.
Watch your matchup. Again, those extensions, right? Now that we've been in ICD-10 world, those ICD-10s are long, right? The multiple digits of specificity and extension. Again, so make sure that you do look at that LCA that I'll be providing you in the chat as well, because all of those are going to be listed. And that's a great pro tip. We have to make sure that it's the correct extension is being picked. And that has to match our documentation. But yeah, that's a great tip. And then, of course, the standard incorrect date of service, they highlighted that, excuse me, and then the billing errors. When they did receive the ADR request, the provider deemed the service was billed in error to Medicare. So that was identified by a few providers. And then, of course, incorrect coding. They specified that documentation submitted for review did not support a complex procedure was performed. Therefore, the claim was changed, which means it was downcoded, right, to reflect the accurate cataract procedure performed. So again, like we highlighted, if it's going to be that complex procedure, you have to make sure that you include those elements of complexity inside of documentation. Because again, it's based on that definition of CPT code. So you have to squarely follow that in documentation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's excuse me, it's all about the documentation.
That's right.
Y'all, to make sure that the surgeons, are getting the separative information in there when they're dictating their operative notes and looking through them, so that, because in these cases, it clearly said, it was, they downcoded it, they changed the code. They said, nope, that's not what you did. You did this instead. So rather than lose that money on that after, and then you're in this TPE, so you're going to continue round after round, make sure that, you're doing those checks on the operative reports, and that anything that's big, anything that they have TPEs out, anything they have a work plan project on, anything you see, there's notices where a payor is scrutinizing something and y'all do it in your practice. Make sure you're checking these things, take a look at the information that's out there and compare it to what you're doing and see if they're saying these things are all wrong. Look and see if, you're doing some of those things, and then correct, you can correct it before it's your turn, because it'll come up.
That's right, Betty. You and I have stressed that on compliance capers again and again and again. Self-auditing is a wonderful function for a compliance program, right? You need to be aware of your service lines from month to month, and make sure that you're looking at not only your billed claims, you've got to look at that supportive documentation, make sure that both pieces are matching up. And best advice is to make sure that that's being done correctly before those claims are actually being pushed out, instead of that continued hurry factor that we do see in the industry, right? Well, things have to be pushed out so the revenue can come in. We do understand that, but again, we see the aftermath on the back end. So that's why our advice is always to take that more proactive approach to compliance instead of that aggressive rationale of reimbursement capture only, because the aftermath can be pretty significant from any payor, commercial or the CMS, because we haven't stressed them too much in compliance capers because we've put our lens on the CMS, but there are also SIUs for the commercial space as well. So make sure that you are looking at those types of policies if you happen to be a contracted provider with a commercial payer as well for these types of cataract surgeries, cataract extractions. Many of them will have their own published policies as well, and you have to be able to squarely follow all of their details for not only the CPT coding and diagnosis coding, but also for documentation purposes. So yeah, self-auditing really, really does help if you spot check in a month and just keep yourself on that current cycle for just spot checking and get into a better habit of doing that proactive stance on compliance. It will really help practices in the long run, for sure.
Yep. Yeah, I usually tell my clients to look at on the commercial side, whatever their biggest three payors is, because you can't look at everybody. It's just too much. But, look at your three biggest payors, look at their sites. They'll have their medical policies on the sites, and look for the things that you do, and, if you're noticing that they're pretty much similar or they pretty much are matching what the LCDs are, there's really not a reason to go looking at the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, they should be pretty similar. But if they have something, they might have some little quirky thing that's a requirement for them, under their policies that maybe Medicare doesn't have or one of the other commercials don't have. But if you just take your big three and knock those out and take a look, you should be pretty safe. And especially if you add CMS into that mix too with Medicare, now you're talking, probably, a good chunk of your service line and your payors.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have to understand in the revenue cycle, practices have to have a great handle on their payer matrix, right? So absolutely, that is exactly what you and I come in and do. We advise, get a handle on your top three, right? Take it easy and just do your top three. And then you can include more and more depending on the size of your practice, right? And if your payer matrix is that large, again, we always advise you can take things piecemeal, do it slowly. But it's a great idea to do things proactively, get a handle on the issues before things go too far sideways, which is what we talk about in compliance capers. So yeah, I thought today's episode was a terrific one to close out our month of the Targeted Probe and Educate program. I'm hoping that our audience got a good taste of the various service lines and the various providers that are receiving this type of education. And so, I hope the audience has a better understanding on the complexity and how these deadlines have to be met. They're incredibly important. And it's important to pass the TPE. It doesn't matter on round 1, 2, or round 3, just pass. So then you're not going to perhaps be kicked over to the RAC or the UPIC. Because they will be doing more investigations on you, more audits on you. And that's not a good thing when this program was developed for education purposes. So
sorry, my girls had to say hi, of course.
Hey.
Yes. You want to take a look at all those things with the TPEs, like we've been saying, the work plans. There's so many things that you can be on the lookout for to make sure that the practice is staying in compliance. Many other things we've already went through on compliance capers. So yes, that proactive thing, you can't say enough about how important that is, because you don't want to find yourself behind the 8 ball trying to find, if it comes to it, you get a big, you're looking like you're getting an ADR that has, 150 records on it, and you're like, uh-oh, so now you're looking for an attorney, you're looking for a consultant, you're scrambling to meet this deadline. So, whereas if you're checking on things and tweaking where you have issues, or at least you have feelers out to where, you have your contacts to where if something like that happens, you're in a much better spot. So, can't stress that enough. That is
Exactly.
such a great thing to say, Sonal. That is so important.
Yeah, absolutely, Betty. I think we have hammered home again and again that proactive compliance is the way to go
Yes.
in 2024. So
Yes.
we're at the halfway point in the year, but proactive
Already.
compliance, we
Yeah.
still have 6 months left of 2024. So there's still time to
Right.
embrace that proactive approach that we keep stressing. So I love it, my friend. I love it. I think today was a great episode, and I hope you have an incredible weekend to start into. I guess we have another holiday coming up as well, right?
Yeah, I didn't realize July
The
4th is
4th of
like
July
next
is
week.
coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, hopefully you can extend your weekend into some 4th of July stuff as well. Yeah, that'll be nice.
And enjoy your birthday weekend. I hope you got some neat stuff planned, maybe with your son, and
Yes, yes,
have a
I've
nice
got some things
enjoyment.
planned. I've got some things planned, and I also have to go to that DMV, apparently. I have to get
Uh-oh.
my driver's license, a brand new one. I think they make you do it every 5 years here, and my time is up. So I got to go get that taken care of.
Tick, tick.
Um, so I satisfy the state of Illinois and make sure my eyes are still good. I'm one of those
Mm.
people that can't just do it online. I get all excited. I'm like, yes, I'll just do it online. They're like, no, you need a vision test. I'm like, oh, that's right. They knew right away. They were like, no, ma'am, you got to come
Not
in.
for you.
Not for
Just
me.
because you're special.
I'm special. Special and blind. Yes. Yes. Well, thank you, my friend. I'm going to enjoy, and I hope the audience enjoys an incredible, warm weekend to close out the month of June. So, yeah, thank you so much, my friend. This was an
Thank
incredible
you.
episode, an incredible month. I love it.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so
And
much, Betty.
thanks, y'all. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye bye.